Commander Veltar stood behind the massive viewing window of Kepler Point Station, watching the small human ship dock with the grace of a dying insect. His reptilian eyes tracked every movement as the vessel bumped against the docking clamps, twice before finally settling into place. The other species representatives around him whispered among themselves, but Veltar remained silent. He had learned long ago that observation revealed more than conversation. The Hegemony Council had sent him here to evaluate this new species called humans. 12 star systems had fallen to the Hegemony's might over the past century, and each conquest had followed the same pattern. First came diplomatic contact, then assessment, then subjugation. The process was as predictable as the rising of twin suns over his homeworld. Through the transparisteel barrier, Veltar could see the human delegation preparing to disembark. Their movement seemed clumsy and uncertain compared to the fluid grace of his own people or the mechanical precision of the Silicon Collective representatives who had arrived earlier. One human stumbled slightly as he adjusted his environmental suit, and Veltar made his first mental note. Weak balance, poor coordination. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, and the humans emerged into the station's main corridor. Veltar counted 7 of them, all wearing bulky protective gear that made them look even more fragile than intelligence reports had suggested. Their leader stepped forward and removed his helmet, revealing soft pink skin and vulnerable-looking features. I am Ambassador Kim Dae-ho of the Terran Federation, the human said, his voice carried by the universal translator system. We come seeking peaceful dialogue and mutual understanding. Veltar's scaled lips curled in what might have been mistaken for a smile. Every species said the same thing when they first encountered the Hegemony. Peace, understanding, cooperation. The words were always the same, and the outcome was always inevitable. The human ambassador was shorter than Veltar by at least 2 feet, and his build suggested a lifetime of soft living. No visible armor plating, no natural weapons, no sign of the genetic modifications that marked a warrior species. His bones looked thin beneath that pale skin, and Veltar could see the pulse beating rapidly in the man's neck. Even at rest, the human's heart worked frantically just to keep his fragile body functioning. Welcome to Kepler Point, Veltar replied, stepping forward. His own voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder, a sound that had intimidated countless species before. But the human ambassador simply smiled and extended his hand in some primitive greeting gesture. Veltar examined the offered appendage with interest. 5 digits, no claws, soft skin covering what appeared to be delicate bones. He could probably crush the entire hand without effort. Instead, he briefly grasped it, noting how the human's flesh compressed under even, gentle pressure. Your journey was long, Veltar observed. Your species requires much assistance to survive in space. Ambassador Kim nodded easily. Space is hostile to life. We've learned to adapt. Adapt. The word caught Veltar's attention, though he wasn't sure why. The Hegemony had never needed to adapt. They had been born for conquest, bred for supremacy. Lesser species adapted because they were weak. The formal meeting began an hour later in the station's central conference chamber. Representatives from a dozen species sat around the circular table, but Veltar's attention remained focused on the humans. There were 3 of them now, the others having remained in their quarters to rest. Another sign of weakness, he noted. The Hegemony delegation had been active for 36 straight hours without showing fatigue. Dr. Park So-jin, the human scientist, activated a holographic display showing various technological schematics. Veltar leaned forward slightly, curious, to see what these creatures considered advanced science. The first image showed a simple fusion reactor design that the Hegemony had abandoned centuries ago as inefficient. The second displayed a kinetic weapon system that relied on crude projectiles rather than sophisticated energy beams. The third was some kind of defensive screen that appeared to work by deflecting rather than absorbing incoming fire. Primitive. Completely primitive. Our technology focuses on reliability and adaptability, Dr. Park explained. We believe in solutions that can be maintained and modified under adverse conditions. Veltar's translator rendered the words clearly, but their meaning puzzled him. Why would anyone design technology expecting adverse conditions? The hegemony built systems that dominated their environment, not systems that bent to accommodate it. During a break in the presentations, gravity fluctuated throughout the station as the aging systems cycled through their maintenance routine. The variation was slight, perhaps 10% of normal, but Veltar watched with interest as 3 humans immediately grabbed nearby supports while his own delegation remained perfectly stable. "Apologies," announced the station's automated system. "Artificial gravity will stabilize momentarily." The human ambassador laughed softly. "Space stations always keep you guessing." "Keep you guessing." Another strange phrase from a species that seemed to accept uncertainty as natural, rather than a problem to be eliminated. As the meeting continued, Veltar found himself cataloging human weaknesses with growing confidence. They needed constant environmental support, their bodies were ridiculously fragile, and their technology was centuries behind hegemony standards. They spoke of cooperation and mutual benefit, but showed no signs of the strength that would make such partnerships worthwhile. When the humans presented their star charts, showing the location of their home system and major colonies, Veltar memorized every detail. 12 worlds, they claimed, with a total population of 8 billion. Small numbers spread across too much space, defended by a fleet that probably relied on the same primitive technology they had displayed earlier. The meeting ended with polite words about future discussions and cultural exchange. Ambassador Kim shook hands again with each representative, that same strange gesture that left the humans completely vulnerable during the contact. Veltar wondered if they realized how easily an enemy could kill them in that moment of trust. Back in his private quarters that night, Veltar composed his report to the Hegemony Council. The words flowed easily across the communication screen as he detailed his observations and conclusions. Species designation 7742, common name humans. Physical assessment: extremely fragile carbon-based life forms with minimal natural defenses. Technology level: primitive, approximately 3 centuries. Behind current hegemony standards. Military capability: negligible threat based on observed equipment and defensive doctrine. Population: sparse distribution across multiple worlds suggests divided attention and resources. Psychological profile: cooperative tendency indicates likely submission when faced with superior force. He paused in his typing, thinking about the strange moments during the meeting when the humans had said things that didn't quite make sense. Their acceptance of uncertainty, their talk of adaptation, their casual attitude toward the dangers of space travel. Then he dismissed these thoughts as irrelevant curiosities. Every species had its peculiarities, but weakness was weakness regardless of how it was dressed in philosophy or attitude. Recommendation: he continued typing, standard subjugation protocols should prove highly effective. Orbital bombardment of primary population centers will likely result in immediate surrender. Estimated resistance duration: less than 1 standard. Weak. Suggest minimal force deployment to conserve resources for more challenging targets. He transmitted the report and leaned back in his chair, already thinking about the next system on the hegemony's expansion list. The humans would be a brief diversion, hardly worth remembering once their worlds flew hegemony banners. Outside his window, the human ship prepared for departure, its crude engines warming up with visible inefficiency. Soon, he thought, those same engines would carry news of humanity's first and last encounter with their future conquerors. The Hegemony Council would receive his report within days, and the Third Battle Fleet would launch within weeks. By the time the next diplomatic season arrived, humanity would be just another entry in the archives of conquered species. Veltar watched the human ship disappear into the darkness of space, carrying Ambassador Kim Dae-ho and his fragile delegation back to their doomed worlds. The commander felt no particular satisfaction or regret. This was simply how the galaxy worked. The strong consumed the weak, and the hegemony was strongest of all. He had no way of knowing that he had just made the greatest mistake in military intelligence history. 3 months had passed since Veltar filed his report about the weak human species. Now he stood on the command deck of the Hegemony Dreadnought Dominion's edge, watching the blue-white marble of Earth grow larger on the main display screen. Around him, the third battle fleet moved in perfect formation like a pack of metal predators closing in for the kill. Sensors detect human vessels moving away from the outer system, reported Sub-Commander Krex from his station. They appear to be evacuating their mining colonies. Veltar nodded with satisfaction. The humans were already running before the fight had even begun. This would be even easier than he had predicted in his intelligence report. The human home system looked exactly as pathetic as their technology had suggested. A few orbital stations around the gas giants, some mining operations in the asteroid belt, and a modest defensive fleet that seemed to be pulling back toward the inner planets. Everything was going according to plan. "Sir, we're receiving a communication from the human fleet," announced the communications officer. "Put it through," Veltar commanded. The screen flickered, and the image of a human military officer appeared. The man wore a dark blue uniform with insignia that probably indicated high rank among his people. His nameplate read, Captain Lee Min-ho. "This is Captain Lee of the Terran Defense Force," the human said. His voice was steady, but Veltar could see the fear in his eyes. "You are entering sovereign Terran space without permission. Please state your intentions." Veltar almost laughed. The creature was trying to sound authoritative while commanding a fleet that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and scrap metal. "I am Commander Veltar of the Hegemony 3rd Battle Fleet," he replied. "Your surrender is required, immediately. Comply, and your species will be granted the privilege of serving the Hegemony. Resist, and face extinction." Captain Lee's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable. We'll have to ask you to leave our system." Now Veltar did laugh, a sound like grinding stone that echoed through the command deck. "Your fleet consists of converted civilian vessels and outdated military hardware. You have no chance of victory." "Maybe not," Captain Lee admitted. "But we'll fight anyway." The transmission ended, leaving Veltar staring at a blank screen. He shook his head in amazement. These humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably the latter. "All ships prepare for engagement," Veltar ordered. "Target their largest vessels first. Make this quick and clean." The battle began exactly as Veltar had expected. Hegemony plasma cannons reached across space with devastating accuracy, while human weapons barely scratched the advanced armor of his ships. The first human cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash within minutes of opening fire. Then, another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Captain Lee's flagship, a vessel that looked like it had been built from mining equipment and hope, took hit after hit, but somehow kept fighting. Veltar had to admire the humans' persistence, even if it was pointless. "Sir, the human fleet is withdrawing toward their home planet," reported Krex. "Let them run," Veltar said. "They'll have nowhere to hide once we achieve orbital superiority." But something bothered him as he watched the human retreat. Their withdrawal seemed too organized, too coordinated for a beaten force. Ships that should have been scattered in panic moved in careful formation, covering each other's escape routes. It looked almost like they had planned this. The Hegemony fleet followed the humans into Earth's upper atmosphere, expecting to finish them off quickly. Instead, they found themselves facing something unexpected. The human ships didn't cluster together like frightened animals. They spread out, using the planet's magnetic field and orbital debris to mask their movements. "Where did they go?" Veltar demanded as his sensors showed empty space where the human fleet should have been. "They appear to have taken cover in the planet's shadow," Krex reported. "Our long-range scanners are having difficulty penetrating the atmospheric interference." Veltar frowned. Using planetary cover was a defensive tactic that required skill and coordination. These humans were proving slightly less incompetent than he had expected, but it wouldn't matter in the end. "Begin orbital bombardment of their major population centers," he ordered. "That will bring them out of hiding quickly enough." The first strikes hit the human cities with devastating force. Veltar watched the explosions bloom like flowers across the planet's surface, each one representing thousands of human lives snuffed out in an instant. Still, the human fleet didn't emerge. to challenge him. Hours passed, then days. The bombardment continued. But instead of surrender, Veltar received reports that confused him. Human activity on the surface was increasing, not decreasing. They were digging, building underground structures, moving equipment and personnel into hidden locations. "Sir, we're detecting some kind of construction activity across multiple continents," Krex reported. The humans appeared to be building extensive tunnel networks. "Hiding underground like insects," Veltar muttered. "How long can they possibly hold out?" His question was answered sooner than expected. On the third day of the siege, human ships began appearing from unexpected directions, striking at the edges of his formation before disappearing again. They hit supply vessels and communication relays, always avoiding direct confrontation with his main battle line. Captain Lee's voice came over the communications channel again, this time from an unknown location. Commander Veltar, the human, said, "You're welcome to keep bombing empty buildings if it makes you feel better. Meanwhile, we'll be out here learning everything we can about your ships and weapons." Learning. There was that word again, the same one Ambassador Kim had used. Months earlier, Veltar dismissed it as typical human arrogance, but the attacks continued, growing more frequent and more precise. Human weapons that had seemed pathetically weak were now finding weak points in hegemony shields. Their tactics were evolving, with each engagement becoming more sophisticated and harder to predict. On the lunar surface, Lieutenant Commander Choi Yeon-soo monitored hegemony communications from a hidden listening post. She had been a communications specialist before the war, but now she found herself serving as humanity's ear in space. The aliens talked openly on their command frequencies, apparently believing that no human technology could intercept their advanced signals. They were wrong about many things. "Earth Command, this is Luna Base," she transmitted on a tightly focused beam. "I'm reading hegemony tactical communications. They're planning to increase bombardment intensity and deploy ground forces to major population centers." "Understood. Luna Base," came the reply from deep beneath Earth's surface. "How long do they expect this to take?" Choi checked her intercept logs. Their commander filed a report predicting total surrender within 1 week. "He seems frustrated that we haven't collapsed yet." 1 week, the voice from Earth Command repeated with what sounded like grim humor. "They really don't understand what they're fighting, do they?" As night fell over the lunar surface, Choi continued her watch. In the distance, Earth turned slowly. On its axis, cities burning like scattered stars against the darkness. But beneath those burning cities, she knew that millions of humans were preparing for a war that would prove far longer and far more costly than anyone on either side could imagine. The hegemony had expected fear and quick surrender. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that treated their overwhelming superiority as merely another problem to be solved through patience, ingenuity, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Commander Veltar was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to fight by your rules. 2 weeks into the siege, Veltar stood before a tactical display that made no sense. Red markers showed successful hegemony bombardments across every major human city on the planet. Blue markers indicated destroyed human infrastructure, collapsed government buildings, and burning industrial centers. By every measure of conventional warfare, the humans should have surrendered days ago. Instead, the green markers representing active human resistance had multiplied across the globe like a spreading infection. "Sir, we have another problem." "Sub-Commander," Krex reported from his station. 3 more of our fighters went down in the European sector. The humans are using some kind of new weapon system." Veltar walked to the communications console and pulled up the recorded transmission from the downed pilots. The last message was brief and filled with static, but the words were clear enough. "Unknown energy signature detected. It looks like our own plasma technology, but modified somehow. I'm hit, going down." "Impossible," Veltar said. "Human technology is centuries behind ours. They couldn't possibly reverse engineer our weapons in mere weeks." But the evidence was mounting. Each day brought reports of human weapons becoming more effective, their tactics more sophisticated. What had started as pathetic resistance was evolving into something that actually threatened his smaller vessels. Deep beneath the ruins of what had once been Seoul, Major General Park Jun-woo coordinated the resistance from a command bunker, carved out of solid rock. The walls around him were lined with salvaged alien technology, human computers, and communication equipment that somehow managed to keep working despite the chaos above. "Dr. Song, what's the status on the plasma cannon project?" he asked the woman hunched over a workbench covered with smoking alien components. Dr. Song Hee-jin looked up from her work, her face streaked with grease and exhaustion. "We've figured out how their energy focusing system works. The aliens use a crystalline matrix to channel plasma flow, but it's actually less efficient than it could be. We can improve on their design." Park raised an eyebrow. "Improve on it how?" "Their crystals are grown, which makes them uniform but brittle. We can manufacture synthetic focusing elements that handle higher energy loads without cracking." She held up a small device that hummed with contained power. "This should give us about 30% more punch per shot." Around the bunker, dozens of human engineers and technicians worked on similar projects. They stripped components from crashed hegemony fighters, analyzed their construction, and found ways to make them better. What amazed Park was how quickly his people learned. Give a human engineer an alien device, and within hours they would understand not just how it worked, but how it could work better. "General, we have movement on the surface," reported Colonel Kim Won-sik from the communication station. "Hegemony, ground troops are deploying in Sector 7. Looks like they're finally tired of bombing empty buildings." Park nodded. They had expected this. The aliens would eventually realize that orbital bombardment alone wouldn't break human resistance. They would have to come down and fight on the ground, where human advantages might actually matter. "Signal all units," Park ordered. "Operation Underground starts now. Show them what happens when they try to fight us on our own planet." Above ground, Commander Veltar watched through his ship's sensors as hegemony transports landed near the ruins of major cities. His soldiers were the finest in the galaxy, trained from birth for combat and equipped with weapons that could cut through armored vehicles like tissue paper. The first reports came back within hours, and they were everything Veltar had hoped for. Human resistance was scattered and poorly organized. His troops advanced through the rubble easily, securing key positions and establishing control over important strategic points. But then the reports began to change. "Squad 7 is under attack by unknown human forces," crackled through the communication system. "They appear to be using our own weapons against us, requesting immediate support." Squad 12 reports heavy casualties in the underground tunnels. The humans have turned the sewer systems into a maze of kill zones. Engineering Corps Delta has lost contact with their advance unit. Last transmission mentioned humans emerging from inside the walls of buildings we had already cleared. Veltar listened to the growing chaos with increasing confusion. His intelligence had suggested that humans were straightforward fighters who preferred direct confrontation. Instead, they seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, striking from hidden positions and melting away before his forces could respond. Colonel Kim Won-sik crouched in a subway tunnel 3 levels beneath what used to be downtown Busan, listening to alien footsteps echoing from the level above. His squad of 12 humans was armed with a mixture of human and alien weapons, all of them modified by Dr. Song's engineering teams to work better than their original specifications. "Remember," he whispered to his soldiers, "they see better than us in the dark, but they hear worse. They're stronger than us individually, but they don't work together like we do. Use every advantage." The hegemony patrol moved through the tunnel intersection directly over their heads, following predetermined search patterns that Kim had studied for days. Alien tactical doctrine was predictable because it had always worked before. They had never faced an enemy that learned from observation and adapted their strategies in real time. Kim gave the signal, and 12 humans moved like a single organism. They emerged from concealed positions, struck with devastating precision, and disappeared back into the tunnels before the surviving aliens could even locate their attackers. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. As they moved through the underground network toward their next position, Kim's radio crackled with reports from other units across the city. The pattern was the same everywhere. Human forces, struck hard and fast, then vanished into hiding places that the aliens couldn't find or couldn't reach. Back on his flagship, Veltar stared at casualty reports that shouldn't exist. His forces had superior technology, superior training, and overwhelming numerical advantage. They should have crushed human resistance within days. Instead, they were bleeding soldiers in dozens of small engagements across the planet. Each patrol that went out came back smaller than when it left. Each strategic position his forces secured came under constant harassment from human fighters who seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear like ghosts. "Sir," Krex reported, his voice tight with confusion. "We're receiving reports from all ground commanders requesting additional reinforcements. Resistance is much heavier than expected." Veltar turned to study the tactical display again. The red and blue markers still showed hegemony control over most strategic positions, but now they were surrounded by growing clusters of green markers representing human activity. It looked like an infection spreading through his carefully planned occupation. How is this possible, he asked himself. They're barely armed savages fighting with primitive equipment. But even as he said the words, Veltar knew they weren't true anymore. The humans weren't fighting with primitive equipment. They were fighting with his equipment, modified and improved in ways that his own engineers had never considered. More disturbing was their tactical evolution. Each human unit seemed to learn from the experiences of others. Strategies that worked against one hegemony patrol were immediately adopted by human forces across the globe. It was as if they shared a collective intelligence that processed information and adapted faster than any individual could manage. For the first time since the campaign began, Commander Veltar felt something he had never experienced in previous conquests. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. The growing suspicion that perhaps he didn't understand his enemy as well as he had thought. On Earth's surface and in its depths, millions of humans continued their resistance. They learned, they adapted, they improved. Each day made them more dangerous than the day before, and in hidden workshops and laboratories across the globe, human engineers worked with salvaged alien technology, always asking the same question that had never occurred to their enemies. How can we make this better? The Battle of New Sol began at dawn on the 21st day of the invasion. Commander Veltar had grown tired of small defeats and scattered resistance. He decided to end the human rebellion with one massive show of force that would break their spirit forever. 50,000 hegemony soldiers surrounded the ruins of what had once been South Korea's capital city. Inside the broken buildings and collapsed subway systems, Captain Oh Tae-young commanded barely 2,000 human defenders. By every rule of warfare that Veltar understood, this would be a slaughter lasting no more than a few hours. The hegemony. Forces moved in perfect formation across the rubble-strewn streets. Their plasma rifles swept left and right, scanning for targets while their heavy armor units rolled forward to crush any resistance. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Then the city began to fight back. The first sign that something was wrong came when a hegemony tank exploded without warning in the middle of an apparently empty intersection. The blast sent metal fragments flying in every direction, but there were no visible human attackers anywhere. "Sniper fire from the north building," reported one unit commander, moving to investigate. But when the hegemony soldiers reached the building, they found nothing except blast damage and the lingering smell of human weapons fire. Whoever had been there was already gone. More tanks exploded. More sniper shots rang out from impossible angles. Each time the aliens responded, they found empty positions and cold weapons that told them nothing about where the next attack would come from. Captain O crouched in a subway maintenance tunnel 2 stories beneath the street, listening to alien communications through equipment salvaged from their own command vehicles. His translator device, another human modification of hegemony technology, let him understand their growing confusion and frustration. "Squad leaders, this is Captain O," he whispered into his radio. "Phase 1 is working. Keep them guessing where we are. Remember, we're not trying to stop 50,000 soldiers. We're trying to make 50,000 soldiers stop themselves." The human defense of New Sol was unlike anything in military history. Instead of holding fixed positions that could be overrun, the defenders flowed through the city like water, always moving, always adapting, always striking where the enemy least expected it. Sergeant Major Lim Da-un led her squad through a network of tunnels that connected shopping centers, office buildings, and subway stations. The tunnels had been there before the war, but human. Engineers had modified them, creating hidden passages and escape routes that turned the entire city into one enormous trap. "Contact ahead," whispered Private Kim from the point position. 20 aliens moving in standard search formation. Lim studied the tactical display on her modified alien scanner. The hegemony soldiers were following their training perfectly, which made them completely predictable. They would secure the intersection, post guards at all approaches, then move forward in a predetermined pattern. "Jinho, take your team to level 3 and wait for my signal," she ordered. "Minjun, circle around to the old department store entrance. Everyone else with me." The ambush lasted exactly 47 seconds. The hegemony soldiers found themselves under attack from 4 different directions at once, with human fighters appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the ruins. By the time alien reinforcements arrived, they found only empty tunnels and the echo of human laughter fading in the distance. Above ground, Lieutenant Colonel Bei Jin-ho watched the larger battle develop through the scope of his modified plasma rifle. The weapon had started life as a hegemony sniper system, but human engineers had improved its focusing crystal and power supply until it could punch through alien armor at twice the original range. He wasn't just shooting at random targets. Every shot was part of a larger plan that Captain O had spent weeks developing. Each fallen alien leader would create confusion in their unit. Each destroyed communications relay would break their coordination. Each successful ambush would force them to move more cautiously, slowing their advance and giving other human units more time to prepare. "Jinho to all units," he transmitted. "The aliens are starting to bunch up in Sector 4. They're getting scared of open ground." "Copy that," came Captain O's voice. "Da-yun, can your people hit them while they're clustered?" "Already moving," Sergeant Major Lim replied. "Give us 10 minutes. Commander Veltar monitored the battle from his flagship, watching with growing disbelief as his overwhelming force became bogged down in street-by-street fighting. The humans should have been crushed in the first hour, but somehow they were still fighting after 6 hours of continuous combat. "Sir, we're taking heavy casualties," reported Ground Commander Jack through the communication system. "The humans aren't fighting like any enemy we've encountered before. They appear to know our movements before we make them." "Impossible," Veltar replied. "They have no strategic intelligence capabilities. Their technology is primitive." But even as he spoke, Veltar could see the evidence on his tactical displays. Human forces moved with perfect timing, always appearing where his troops were weakest, always disappearing before his reinforcements could arrive. It was as if they could read his mind. The truth was both simpler and more complex than mind reading. The humans had studied hegemony tactical doctrine for weeks, learning their patterns and procedures until they could predict alien movements with mathematical precision. What Veltar saw as superior military discipline, the humans saw as fatal predictability. Private First Class Ryu Seo-hyun had been wounded in the morning's fighting, her left arm useless from a plasma burn that had nearly cost her life, but she refused evacuation, instead taking position in a bombed-out office building that overlooked the city's main transportation hub. For 6 hours, she held that position alone against increasing hegemony pressure. Her modified rifle ran out of power cells, so she switched to alien weapons taken from fallen enemies. When those broke down, she improvised explosives from alien equipment and human materials. "Seo-hyun, you need to fall back," Captain O's voice crackled through her radio. "You can't hold that position against an entire battalion." "Negative, sir," she replied, checking the charge on her last functional weapon. "If they take this building, they'll have clear firing lines into sectors 2 and 3. Our people won't be able to move freely." "That's an order, Private." Ryu looked out at the street below, where more than 100 alien soldiers were preparing for their final assault on her position. She thought about her family, her friends, her planet under siege by creatures who saw humans as nothing more than insects to be crushed. "Sorry, Captain," she said. switching off her radio. Some positions are too important to abandon. The final assault on her building began at sunset. Ryu fought them room by room, floor by floor, using every trick that human ingenuity and desperation could devise. She turned furniture into barriers, light fixtures into weapons, and her own wounded body into the most dangerous obstacle the aliens had yet encountered. When hegemony forces finally took the building 3 hours later, they found only silence and empty rooms. Private Ryu had held her position exactly as long as the human resistance needed, buying precious time for her comrades to complete their own missions. The Battle of New Seoul ended not with human victory, but with something far more significant. After 14 hours of fighting, Commander Veltar ordered a full withdrawal of his ground forces. For the first time in hegemony military history, superior numbers and technology had failed to break inferior enemies. As alien transports lifted, off from the smoking ruins, Captain O emerged from the tunnels with his surviving defenders. They had lost nearly half their people, but they had proven something that would change the course of the war. Humans could not only fight the hegemony, they could win. Word of the impossible stand at New Seoul spread across the galaxy within days, carried by merchants and diplomats who could hardly believe the reports. Species that had surrendered to the hegemony decades earlier began to whisper among themselves. If humans could defeat the invincible conquerors, perhaps freedom was possible after all. Commander Veltar sat in his command chair, staring at casualty reports that made no sense. He had lost 12,000 soldiers trying to crush 2,000 humans in a single ruined city. His tactical computers insisted that victory should have been inevitable. But the humans had changed the meaning of inevitable. They had taken the impossible and made it happen through courage, intelligence, and something else that Veltar was only beginning to understand. They refused to be beaten. No matter what the odds, no matter what the cost, they simply would not accept defeat. For the first time in his military career, Commander Veltar began to wonder if the hegemony might lose this war. Captain Young Eunbi floated in the darkness between stars, her small boarding craft hidden in the shadow of a drifting asteroid. Through her helmet display, she watched the massive hegemony dreadnought Crushing Fist patrol the outer edge of Earth's solar system. The alien warship was 3 kilometers long and armed with enough firepower to destroy cities. But Young saw something else when she looked at it. She saw opportunity. "Team leaders, this is Young," she whispered into her communication system. "Target. Analysis complete. The dreadnought has the standard hegemony design flaws we identified from the captured technical manuals." Her boarding team consisted of 30 volunteers, all of them experienced miners and construction workers who had learned to fight in the tunnels beneath Earth's burning cities. They carried equipment that looked like construction tools because most of it had started that way. Human engineers had modified mining lasers into cutting beams and industrial manipulators into weapons of war. "Remember the plan," Young continued. "We hit the engine compartments first to prevent escape, then work our way forward to the bridge. These ships are designed to fight enemies at long range, not to deal with boarders who are already inside." The attack began exactly as planned. Young's modified mining shuttle attached itself to the dreadnought's hull like a parasite, cutting through the thick armor plating with industrial lasers that alien engineers had never considered as weapons. Within minutes, 30 humans poured into the corridors of the most powerful warship in the hegemony fleet. The alien crew had never trained for internal combat. Their security forces were designed to repel boarding attempts at the airlocks and docking bays, not to fight enemies who appeared inside their own ship, like ghosts materializing from solid metal. Jung's team moved through the vessel with the efficiency of people who understood complex machinery. They had studied captured hegemony technical documents until they knew alien ships better than many of their crews. Every corridor they chose led toward a critical system. Every door they cut through brought them closer to complete control. "Bridge. Secured," Jung reported as her team overwhelmed the command center after 40 minutes of fighting. "All senior officers dead or captured. Ship is ours." But capturing the dreadnought was only the beginning of Jung's real plan. As her technical specialists began downloading the ship's computer databases, human engineers who had infiltrated with The boarding team started modifying the vessel's weapons and defensive systems. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Specialist Park from the weapons control station. "The alien targeting computers are incredibly sophisticated, but they're designed to track large, slow-moving targets. They have trouble with small, fast objects that change direction unpredictably." Jung nodded. "Just like humans. Within hours, the crushing fist had become something unprecedented in galactic warfare. It was a hegemony dreadnought under human control, with alien technology improved by human innovation, and crewed by people who understood that improvisation was more valuable than protocol." Admiral Nam Gite received the news of Jung's success from his hidden command center deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. The capture of an intact hegemony dreadnought was beyond anything they had dared hope for, but Nam saw possibilities that went far beyond a single ship. "Signal all resistance cells," he ordered. "Operation Reverse Hunt is now active. We're going from hiding underground to hunting them in space." The change in the war's character became apparent within days. Human forces that had spent weeks learning to fight defensively in ruins and tunnels suddenly appeared in space, using captured alien ships to strike at hegemony supply lines and communication networks. Each captured vessel revealed more alien technology that human engineers immediately set about improving. Weapon systems became more efficient, defensive screens became more resilient, and engines became more powerful under human modifications. It was as if the aliens had given humans a gift without realizing it. Commander Veltar watched his fleet shrink day by day as ships disappeared during routine patrol missions or supply runs. The humans were hunting his forces with their own technology, turning the hegemony's greatest strength against them. "Sir, we've lost contact with the battlecruiser Relentless Advance," Sub-Commander Krex reported. "Last transmission indicated they were investigating a distress signal from the transport heavy burden." "Another trap," Veltar said grimly. The humans had become masters at using captured hegemony vessels to lure other ships into ambushes. They would broadcast fake distress calls, emergency signals, and routine communications, all perfectly authentic because they were using real alien equipment operated by people who had learned to think like their enemies. But the humans weren't just winning through superior tactics. They were winning through something more fundamental that Veltar was only beginning to understand. Major Han Soo-jin's information warfare campaign was systematically destroying hegemony morale across the entire fleet. Working from a communications center hidden in the ruins of Geneva, Han broadcast carefully crafted messages on hegemony military frequencies. The messages contained truth that was more devastating than any lie could have been. "Attention hegemony forces," her voice crackled across space in perfect alien translation. "This is Major Han of the Terran Resistance. We know you expected easy victory over our inferior species. We know your commanders promised you would be home within weeks." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "It has been 37 days since your invasion began. In that time, you have lost 46 major vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts and a battle station. Your ground forces have been unable to secure a single human city, despite overwhelming numerical superiority. Your supply lines are under constant attack by forces using your own technology against you." The messages were accompanied by video footage of human forces operating captured hegemony equipment, audio recordings of alien officers admitting their failures, and detailed casualty reports that proved human resistance was not only continuing, but growing stronger. "Your leaders told you that humans were weak," Han continued. "They told you we would surrender at the first sign of superior force. They were wrong about everything. How many other things have they been wrong about?" The psychological impact was devastating. Hegemony soldiers who had never questioned their superiority began to doubt their commanders, their mission, and their chances of survival. For a military force built on absolute confidence in their own dominance, uncertainty was more dangerous than enemy weapons. Sub-Commander Krex found himself reading intercepts of human communications with growing fascination and dread. The humans talked about the war in ways that made no sense according to everything he had been taught about inferior species. "Listen to this," he said to Veltar, playing back a recorded transmission between human commanders. "They're discussing casualty rates and resource expenditure like it's a mathematical problem to be solved, rather than a tragedy to be mourned." The recording was clear despite the encryption that hegemony computers had easily broken. Two human officers were planning their next operation with the same calm professionalism that hegemony commanders used when discussing routine patrol schedules. "We can accept 15% losses if it guarantees capture of their supply depot," one human was saying. "The strategic value outweighs the tactical cost." "Agreed," replied the other. "But we need to rotate the assault teams afterward. Morale stays higher when people see their sacrifices producing results." Veltar listened with growing confusion. These creatures were discussing their own deaths like accountants reviewing budgets. They calculated acceptable losses, planned for casualties, and somehow maintained fighting spirit even while acknowledging that many of them would not survive. "Sir," Krek said quietly, "I'm beginning to think we don't understand these humans at all." The truth of that statement became clear during the Battle of Titan, when Admiral Nam led a human fleet composed entirely of captured and modified hegemony vessels against a major alien supply convoy. The engagement lasted 6 hours and ended, with complete human victory, but what disturbed Veltar most was how the humans had won. They fought with mathematical precision, accepting casualties when necessary and avoiding them when possible. Each ship captain knew exactly how much damage their vessel could absorb before becoming ineffective, and they used that knowledge to squeeze maximum performance from both their equipment and their crews. More disturbing, they seemed to learn from every engagement. Tactics that worked against hegemony forces in one battle were refined and improved for the next. Weapons modifications that proved effective were immediately shared across the entire human fleet. They were evolving as warriors even faster than they had evolved as defenders. "Commander," came a transmission from one of his patrol vessels. "We're detecting human ships moving toward our position. They appear to be using modified hegemony stealth technology." Veltar looked at his tactical display and saw the impossible. Human vessels built from captured alien technology but improved beyond original specifications were hunting his ships with their own advanced systems. The predators had become prey. "All ships, return to defensive formation," he ordered. "We're pulling back to the outer system." For the first time in hegemony military history, a battle fleet was. 6 months after the invasion began, Commander Veltar stood once again in the observation deck of Kepler Point Station. But this time, he was not watching human ships arrive as curiosities to be studied and dismissed. This time, he was watching them arrive as equals who had earned their place through blood and fire. The human fleet that approached the neutral station bore little resemblance to the converted mining vessels that had fled Earth's solar system during the early days of the E. These were purpose-built warships, sleek and deadly, incorporating the best of both human and hegemony technology. They moved with the confidence of predators who had proven themselves in battle. Veltar's own reflection in the transperistyle showed the changes that 6 months of warfare had carved into his features. Scars from boarding actions marked his scaled hide, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen certainties crumble into dust. The proud commander who had filed that first dismissive report about human weakness was gone, replaced by a survivor who had learned respect through painful experience. "The human delegation is requesting permission to dock," announced the station's communication system. "Granted," Veltar replied, though the word came hard. Everything about this meeting went against his deepest instincts. The hegemony did not negotiate with inferior species. They conquered them, but the humans had proven that they were not inferior, not in any way that truly mattered. The airlock cycled open, and Ambassador Kim Dae-ho stepped onto the station exactly as he had 6 months earlier. He looked unchanged, the same soft skin, the same vulnerable build, the same calm expression that had once seemed like foolish innocence. But Veltar now understood that appearances meant nothing when measuring human strength. Behind the ambassador came Dr. Park So-jin, now wearing the insignia of humanity's chief technology officer. Her equipment cases were different this time, sleeker and more advanced. The primitive technologies she had displayed during their first meeting had evolved into systems that surpassed even hegemony engineering. "Commander Veltar," Ambassador Kim said, extending his hand in that same gesture of greeting that had once seemed so foolish. I hope we can reach an understanding that benefits both our species. Veltar looked at the offered hand for a long moment. 6 months ago, he could have crushed those fragile bones without effort. Now he knew that the real strength in that hand had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with the mind behind it. He grasped the human's hand carefully, remembering lessons learned too late about judging strength by appearance. "Ambassador," he replied, "your people have taught mine many things. Perhaps it is time we listen to what you have to say." The formal negotiations began in the same chamber where Veltar had first dismissed humanity as a negligible threat. Representatives from dozens of species sat around the circular table, but the dynamic had changed completely. Where once the humans had been supplicants hoping for peaceful contact, they now spoke as equals, who commanded respect through proven capability. Dr. Park activated her holographic display, showing technological innovations that made Veltar's scientific officers lean forward with genuine interest. The weapon systems she presented were recognizably based on hegemony technology, but improved in ways that alien engineers had never considered. "Our approach to defensive screens," Dr. Park explained, focuses on adaptive frequency modulation rather than static energy absorption. By constantly shifting the screen's harmonic resonance, we can deflect a much wider range of attack types while using 60% less power. Veltar watched his own technical staff taking notes frantically. The humans weren't just showing off their achievements. They were offering to share knowledge that could revolutionize galactic technology. "Your innovations are impressive," he admitted. "But I must ask, how did you accomplish so much in such a short time?" Ambassador Kim smiled, and this time Veltar recognized the expression for what it was. Not naive innocence, but quiet confidence born from hard-won experience. "We learned from our teachers," Kim replied. "Your people provided excellent examples of what not to do." The words stung, but Veltar could not argue with their truth. The hegemony had taught humanity about their technology, their tactics, and their weaknesses by attacking them with all of it. In trying to destroy the humans, they had given them everything they needed to become formidable opponents. "Your military doctrine," continued the ambassador, "assumes that superior force guarantees victory. That works well against enemies who fight by the same rules you do, but humans don't fight by anyone's rules except our own." During a break in the negotiations, Veltar found himself alone with Dr. Park in the station's observation lounge. Through the vast windows, both human and hegemony ships patrolled nearby space, maintaining an uneasy peace. "Doctor," Veltar said, "I must satisfy my curiosity about something. How did your people adapt so quickly to our technology? My intelligence report suggested that human science was centuries behind our achievements." Park looked out at the ships for a moment before answering. "Your intelligence was correct about our technology level, but it missed something more important, which was, we're really good at learning things, especially when our survival depends on it." She turned to face him directly, and Veltar saw something in her eyes that he had missed during their first meeting. Intelligence, yes, but more than that. A fierce curiosity that treated every challenge as a puzzle to be solved rather than an obstacle to be endured. "Your people build technology to last forever," Park continued. "It's impressive, but it also means you rarely need to innovate. We build things that break, so we're always fixing, improving, and rebuilding. When you gave us your technology to study, we didn't just learn how it worked. We learned how to make it work better." The final session of negotiations resulted in the Treaty of Kepler Point, a document that established humanity as a recognized power in galactic politics. The terms were not surrender or subjugation, but mutual respect and non-aggression. The hegemony would withdraw from all human territories, while humanity would share selected technologies with species that requested them. But the real significance of the treaty went far beyond its specific terms. Word of humanity's victory had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carrying a message that resonated with every oppressed species under hegemony rule. If humans could defeat the invincible conquerors, perhaps freedom was possible for everyone. Within months of the treaty signing, rebellion broke out in 7 different star systems. Species that had accepted hegemony dominance for decades suddenly remembered what independence felt like. The carefully maintained order of galactic politics began to crumble as news of human victory inspired others to fight for their own freedom. Veltar returned to his homeworld, carrying more than just a peace treaty. He carried a complete revision of everything the hegemony thought they knew about power, strength, and dominance. His final report to the High Command was very different from his first assessment of humanity. Species designation, human. Classification, never underestimate, under any circumstances. Physical capabilities, irrelevant to combat effectiveness. Technological assessment, rapid innovation. Capability exceeds any known species. Military doctrine, adaptable to point of being unpredictable. Psychological profile, refusal to accept, defeat even when defeat appears inevitable. He paused in his writing, thinking about everything he had witnessed during the long months of warfare. Recommendation: immediate establishment of diplomatic relations and cultural exchange programs. Humanity represents a new model of galactic civilization that prioritizes adaptation over domination. They are dangerous enemies but potentially valuable allies. Most importantly, they have proven that strength comes not from what a species is born with, but from what they choose to become when tested. The report concluded with a personal note that Veltar knew would disturb his superiors. The hegemony has ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries by being stronger than everyone else. Humanity has shown us that there are other kinds of strength, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to fight by your rules. Years later, when historians studied the period that marked the beginning of the end of hegemony, dominance, they would focus on battles and technological innovations. But Veltar knew that the real turning point had been simpler and more profound than any single victory. It was the moment when the galaxy learned that strength could not be measured by appearance, that intelligence could not be judged by technology, level, and that the most formidable warriors were often those who looked least like warriors at all. The humans had seemed fragile to him, and in many ways they were. Their bodies broke easily, their machines failed regularly, and their societies were chaotic compared to hegemony order. But their minds were unbreakable, their spirits were unquenchable, and their determination was absolute. In the end, those qualities had proven more valuable than all the advanced technology and superior firepower in the galaxy. Standing in his private chambers on the hegemony homeworld, Commander Veltar looked out at stars that no longer seemed as stable and predictable as they once had. Somewhere among those distant lights, humans were building their new civilization, learning and growing and becoming something the galaxy had never seen before.